Hi and welcome back to Bike Speeds. So this week we're going to service this lovely fold-in Brompton bike. With this one we're going to not only service it, but we're going to replace the rear 3-speed hub gear cable, we're going to replace the chain, we're going to address the headset bearings which are a little bit tight, and we're also going to replace the front tyre and tube, as well as the general service and checking right through this. And this bike certainly needed this service, as you'll see in the talking section. So the telltale sign with everything on bikes is the chain. You can see here the chain is stretched out, it needs replacing, so that will be something we'll do during this service. Thankfully this is a single drive train, so it's not so critical for the gears, but we have got this issue with the internal hub where the cable here is grabbing inside the outer and is not actually changing gear very efficiently into third gear. So we're going to take that cable out of there, replace that along the way with this. So we're going to get the chain off first. We're going to take everything off the bike that we want to clean and service on the bench. So we'll get all the parts off that we need to do for that. This bike wasn't a comprehensive service, it was a routine service. So we didn't take every single component off this one. We dealt with some on the bike, some on the bench, but we got this bike absolutely spot on by the time it left the shop. So we are going to take off that cable tensioner and the rear hub and everything off of there. We're going to take the crankset off of the bottom bracket. We can test the bottom bracket, clean this up as well, make sure everything's right there. You can see it's pretty grimy there. It's started to build up the black around the edges from the oils and debris that's getting onto the bike. So perfectly timed service this one. Customer timed this one absolutely spot on to address a few issues and clean the bike up. So we're going to get this tensioner apart. On some of the Bromptons this will actually change gears. They'll have a couple of gears on the rear and the internal hub, but with this one it's just a tensioner, but it still needs cleaning up. It's nice to keep that moving. Off comes the lock ring to get the single sprocket off the rear, so you can see here how grimy that is. You can see the debris building up on a few of those cogs. That will grind away at the chain and grind away at the gearing. So if we clean that up and re-lubricate everything, then that will actually last longer once this service has been performed on this bike. So we'll take the chain set apart. Because it was pretty grimy, I'm going to run the cogs themselves through the ultrasonic cleaner as I'm doing there, along with the other parts that I want to clean. But I'm not going to put the crank arm itself through. It is an anodized finish on this one, although it's aluminium, it's got like a surface on it because it has the Brompton logos on there. We don't want to affect those in any way by putting it through the ultrasonic cleaner, so we did the pedal arm, we just washed that through with the warm soapy water, and the rest goes through the ultrasonic cleaner. Clean up this little spring that goes in the center for the tensioner. That's not lubricated originally, but we are going to lubricate that to stop it going rusty when we put it back together. And all these little bits and bobs that we put through as well, we just clean those up with the warm soapy water. And then we wash all that debris off that's gone through the ultrasonic cleaner, has been loosened up nicely, and that chain ring and also the sprocket is now spotlessly clean for the new chain, and that will be nice running forwards with the bike. Lubricate the jockey wheels as we do with any bike with a derailleur. Although this is a tension, it still runs jockey wheels, that's how it gets its tension, so we lubricate those the same. And this spring, there's no harm in lubricating that to stop it going rusty, to just help that in the future. And this isn't a lubricated part originally, but I do put a little bit of silicone grease on there so that it doesn't stick and bond and keeps the tension on the chain correctly if it bounces up and down and the tensioner is needed. That spring is in there for a reason, so we like to lubricate the center of that as well. And then the actuator, I always lubricate these as well. I'm putting general purpose grease and a little bit of thin oil on the chain itself and a little bit of copper grease on the threads of the adjuster, just so that stays nice moving forwards down the line. A bit of copper grease on the crank bolts there, put those back together. I get all this on the bench, and then I'll torque this up as well on the bench. It's just a little bit easier than when it's on the bike, so we make sure everything's correct there and get the chain guard back on there. And as you can see here, I'm torquing that up. Just find that a little bit easier than doing that one on the bike, so we do that on the bench. Next up, I'm going to clean and check the hub. So I'd initially clean off all the dirt and debris. I'll have a little feel around that, make sure everything there is feeling okay with the bearings. The bearings felt absolutely fine. So now I'll wash down the wheel. I'll fill all the spokes and check those. Again, they felt absolutely fine. Because this was a standard routine service, we didn't check all the spokes for tension, but I do that by feel, and if I feel it's a little bit wrong, I'll mention that to the customer and then deal with that as they choose fit to do. We also put a new tyre on the front of this one with a new tube. It had a puncture when it came in, but the customer had an issue with this where she took it in for a temporary repair somewhere and she wanted a new tyre put on this bike, so that's what we've done there. So we've got the new tyre on there as per spec of original, new inner tube, inflated correctly. and now we're going to address these headset bearings. They were very notchy. If you was to ride this bike, you'd have been constantly correcting for the bike tramming down the road in a straight line. The bearings were just a little bit too tight, but they weren't worn, they were just over tightened. This would have been from factory, from when the bike was originally put together. You can see there now they're much looser. There's still no play in them, they're just at the right point of perfection there, so we're quite pleased with that. Now we're going to wash down the bike. You can see here we're using our big softy brush. This is a lovely soft bristled nylon brush. We sell these on our website along with things like our cables and our grease selections. We also do vinyl detailing stickers on there and a few other items that we use during our videos over there on our website. So the link is in the description below. It's a nice way of supporting the channel. We don't do Patreon or any of those things, so you can drop us a little order there and you'll get something back and we'll get something out of it as well. And it's our way of supporting our YouTube channel, so if you can pop over to the website, it would be much appreciated. So now we're going to get this bike back together. You can see there I'm putting on the crankset first. Put a little bit of grease on the splines of the bottom bracket to help that arm, to stop it binding permanently if ever we need to take that off again. Torque that up to the correct setting, get the front wheel on. Once this is all back together, we'll then check things like the brakes and the gears to make sure everything's operating. But initially we're getting all these components back on the bike. That chain tensioner there, and now we're going to deal with the rear cable for the shifter. So although we can take this cable out quite easily, it's very tricky to get these back in. You do actually have to take this apart in order to get a new cable in. So it goes in this fitting here, but the actual hole is 90 degrees out from that, so it's very tricky to put one back in. So we just pop that apart to get the new cable in. In goes that new cable, that all goes back together, and now that's ready to go back on the bike and into a new outer that we've got there. Again, we're using our super slick cables there on the shifter, again available over on our website. In goes the actuator for the hub there, on goes the new cable. We'll get all that set right and tight and just adjust it up correctly, make sure that everything's okay before we nip off the cable and put a new cable end on there. On goes our lovely new chain. Again, we're using one of our silver chains here. They're a lovely quality chain, these, and they just look nice. They're not dull, they're not a poor finish, they're a beautiful chain. Now with the adjustment of the brakes here, I did something a little bit different on this one. I've got quite small hands and I know this rider is a similar stature to myself, so I actually did the adjustment on this on the reach adjuster of the brake, because it brought the levers closer to the handlebars and gave us this perfectly adjusted brake where there was a little bit too much slack and play in the brake when it came in. So I used the reach adjusters on that, something I've only done once or twice in the past, usually on children's bikes, but in this instance I think that works well. Now we're going to torque through the bike. You can see here brake levers are loose, so we're retorquing those. Crown there, all the brake components, make sure that the pads are tight and right, and as you can see there was a little bit of movement on one of those pads where it wasn't quite correct. We'll deal with the pedals, the chain set, everything through the bike that can be torqued we'll go through, make sure it's correct. This saddle clamp was loose, so again that's something that makes the service worthwhile in itself, just to have got that correct. Check all the mudguard fittings, check all these little Allen key bolts, all the various nuts and bolts around the bike. It's a good practice when you're getting a bike serviced to make sure that whoever's doing it is going right the way through the bike. And then the final thing I dealt with was this little back wheel here. It was very tight, barely turned at all. I would imagine if you're on a shiny surface it would actually slide rather than roll when you're rolling the bike in its folded position. So I just oiled that, worked it in, and now I'm quite happy with the way this bike presents, that it's absolutely ready to go and is vastly improved from the way it came in. You can see here on the before and afters what a huge difference we've made to this bike. It will ride smoother and more precise with all the adjustments made. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please do subscribe. Do drop us a comment, especially if you're used to one of these bikes and you ride them all the time. Tell us your experiences with one of these Brompton bikes, and do hit the like button, do drop a comment, and please do subscribe to the channel. Head over to our website just in time for Christmas. There's plenty of good gifts on there, and we will see you again very soon. Bye for now.